Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51%, a show about women reshaping our world. Coming up, campaigning for the top job. Will the next leader of the United Nations be a woman? Also, we need to talk about Donald Trump, that is. We meet Politico reporter Eliza Collins, who's been following the highly controversial Republican candidate, and how the forced sterilisation of 300,000 indigenous women became a dominating issue in the Peruvian election. But first and later this year, UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon will be finishing up his 10-year term. Much of the debate over his replacement is focusing on whether the UN is about to get its first woman leader. We ran a Twitter poll to see whether you think it's about time a woman led the global body. Some 72% of people said yes, while 28% said no. So far, 4 out of the 8 candidates who've thrown their hat into the ring are female, including former New Zealand Prime Minister Helen Clark. This report by AFP's William Edwards.
He's been in the job for nearly 10 years now, but Ban Ki-moon is coming to the end of his 2 terms as UN Secretary-General, and the race is on to find a replacement. The application process is traditionally held behind the closed doors of the Security Council. This time the process will be at least a little more transparent, says UN expert Richard Gowan.
For the first time, the UN General Assembly will be holding hearings with the candidates to be Secretary-General. But ultimately, the choice comes down to the big 5 powers on the Security Council, just as in the past.
Another change is that for the first time, women have been specifically invited to apply.
As with women's leadership in anything, it sends the message to younger women that anything is possible. Every major organisation like the UN should expect in the fullness of time to have a woman leader, but it's still too rare a thing around the world. So for sure the UN's day will come when it has a woman SG.
By UN tradition, the next region to produce a Secretary-General should be Eastern Europe. Bulgaria's Irina Bokova is a potential candidate, although as head of UNESCO she may face US opposition following the cultural body's recent recognition of Palestine. Another Bulgarian, EU Commissioner Kristalina Georgieva, is also a possibility, but there are obstacles to her candidacy too.
She is seen as being liberal. She's been part of the European Commission at a time when the EU has sanctions on Russia. And so in Moscow there is some suspicion that she's just too pro-Western.
The ongoing war in Ukraine and the migrant crisis may make it less likely for an Eastern European to get the top job, opening it up to other regions, including South America. While a much talked about wildcard is Angela Merkel, though of course she would have to give up her day job as Chancellor of Germany. In the end, despite the new public hearings, the final decision will likely come down to a compromise between the 2 Security Council powers most invested in the result, Russia and the United States.
Now, there's also been much talk about another top job being possibly filled by a woman, that of course being the President of the United States. And while attention is very much on Democrat candidate Hillary Clinton, the Republican candidate, Donald Trump, recently found himself in hot water over his comments that women should be punished for having abortions. Let's hear what he had to say.
Do you believe in punishment for abortion, yes or no, as a principle?
The answer is that there has to be some form of punishment.
For the woman?
Yeah, there has to be some form.
10 cents, 10 years,
I don't know. That I don't know.
Eliza Collins is a reporter with Politico and she's been on the Trump campaign trail. She joins me now from Washington, DC. Eliza, thank you so much for being with us. A YouGov Huffington Post poll is now saying 60% of voters believe Trump does not respect women. Now, given his latest comments, what are Republican Party officials saying?
So that's actually even a lower poll. Recent polls kind of average at 70%. So Republican officials are obviously panicked, but at the same time, they're also working really hard to keep Trump out. Or Republican officials aren't, but many in the Republican Party. So I think it's kind of, they're panicked, he's hurting their party, but they're trying to also kind of use his comments to push him out and get someone a little bit more mainstream Republican in.
And surely the last thing that you want to do in an election where gender is indeed a hot button issue is alienate 51% of the electorate.
Exactly right. I mean, you can't win an election if you alienate 51% of the electorate, and when 70% of them are saying, no way, we won't vote for you. So clearly they're panicked, and you're seeing a lot of that. Ted Cruz, John Kasich, really hitting on the trail, especially after Trump made those comments. Ted Cruz went through Wisconsin. He brought his mom, he brought his wife, he brought female surrogates, really kind of going for a strong woman presence. He made comments like, I've always been surrounded by strong women. So you're definitely seeing the other candidates try to use it to their advantage.
Yet I imagine there could be long-term damaging effects for the Republican Party, regardless of whether there are other candidates or not.
Exactly, and we saw that in the last election with Mitt Romney. He didn't do very well with women, and it cost him the election, and the Republican Party had to go back and kind of analyze how to do better, and obviously this time around it's even worse. I was talking to someone at Planned Parenthood, and they said Mitt Romney looked like a raging liberal compared to Donald Trump. I mean, so in 2012 they thought Mitt Romney ruined it. Now in 2016 it's even worse.
So Eliza, who are the women who are actually supporting Donald Trump?
You know, Donald Trump's supporters they're interested in someone who is strong, who says it like it is. They feel like he's very strong on foreign policy. So they are not necessarily as interested in domestic policy or even what he says. And you hear that over and over. You know, people will be like, yeah, I didn't like that comment. But overall, what he stands for, you know, we don't need someone who's soft. And women I've talked to out there are saying, yeah, I don't like that he cusses, or I don't like that he says this about women, but in general, he's going to get things done.
Does he care that he's perceived to be anti-women?
I think he cares. I mean, we saw him bring out his wife after those comments. He walked them back, which is something Donald Trump never does. But I also think Donald Trump doesn't really, he's kind of gotten in this niche. He plows forward. There's not a lot of looking back and changing and really analyzing what he's done. You know, Donald Trump has kind of made a way for himself by saying really controversial things. And his first day, he said that, you know, illegal immigrants were rapists and criminals. So he's kind of just plowing forward.
So do you think the gender issue is indeed going to be the deciding factor in November? Is this actually going to make people turn out and vote?
I think that there's a very high chance it could, especially after comments like the abortion comments. We also saw him get in a fight over Ted Cruz and his wife. You know, we saw in Utah, which has a very high Mormon population, there were ads targeted at Mormon women with pictures of Donald Trump's wife, nude photos from her modeling days. So I think that we're seeing kind of targeted ads. Women are upset, there's protests. I could definitely see it being a big issue, especially if Hillary Clinton is the nominee.
Eliza Collins, I'm afraid we've run out of time. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
And turning our attention now to Peru, and one of the biggest issues in their presidential campaign was the forced sterilisation of some 300,000 indigenous women in the late 1990s. The Peruvian Health Ministry promoted their sterilisation under the government of Alberto Fujimori. He, of course, being the father of Keiko Fujimori, a current presidential candidate. The survivors are now seeking justice and compensation. Our team on the ground went to meet some of them.
Ruth, a mother of 4 children, had her fallopian tubes tied without anaesthetic. A group of nurses came to her house 17 years ago and forced her to go to hospital.
The nurses grabbed hold of me and tied my hands and feet to a bed. One of them took hold of my head. The pain was unbearable. "It hurts," I cried. "Doctor, it hurts." He said, "Be strong, just help me do this."
Roots is not an isolated case. Around 300,000 women were operated on without their consent. The idea of sterilising indigenous women to eradicate poverty was implemented by Alberto Fujimori's government between 1996 and 2001. Today, Ruth is going to a village close to where she lives to tell these poor, rural women, some of whom are illiterate, about their rights. That's because in November, the government started to register victims of forced sterilisation. These women are seeking justice.
They took us home the same day of the operation in the same ambulance, and since then, no one's come to check if we're dead or if we're okay. Everyone's forgotten about us until now. We want justice, all of us who were forcibly sterilized.
This scar is from the operation. More than 2,000 women have spent the past 14 years locked in legal action against the state. But none of them has been recognised as a victim of forced sterilisation. In Lima, the Justice Minister says it's difficult to get to the truth.
What we need to establish is this: in which cases was this surgery voluntary, and in which cases was it forced? And that can only be done through the courts.
It's a sensitive political issue, right in the middle of a presidential campaign. Veronica Mendoza, a left-wing candidate, faces Keiko Fujimori in the presidential election. She says Alberto Fujimori's daughter was aware of the situation.
There's no doubt that Keiko Fujimori was an accomplice in the sterilisation of hundreds of poor rural women against their will, most of them non-native Spanish speakers. We know that it was state policy which came right from the top of government. They knew about it. The health ministers and the president at the time, Alberto Fujimori, who's now in prison for human rights abuses and corruption.
With the election looming, these women are worried that Keiko, the daughter of Alberto Fujimori, will be the next president of Peru.
And that's it for now. And if you'd like to comment on what you've just seen, you can head to our Facebook page. That's 51%-France24. Do send us a tweet at _51%. Thanks for your feedback so far, and please keep those comments coming in. So until our next program, bye for now.